you have a Bible, please turn with me to Luke chapter 10. We'll study there from Luke chapter 10 in just a second. Do you guys ever have, and I mean guys literally here, do you guys, the guys who are here in the room, do you ever have a hard time getting close to other dudes? Okay, Rick Moore shook his head at me when I looked at him, so at least one person in the room knows what I'm talking about, right? Okay, Dewey Horton, if you catch him in the hallway, the man will bear hug you to death. And I love him for that. Some of us are not quite as huggable. Some of us guys are not quite as warm and soft and a wonderful place to land. Sometimes we're more like sandpaper. Sometimes we're more like razor blades. Sometimes we're rough and tumble, and we don't want to have the big bear hug or anything like that. I think for a lot of us guys, some of us struggle to connect with people and to really open up and to share ourselves into these kind of things that ladies seem to just have no problem doing. I don't know how you all do it. But when I go to read, as we've been studying in our Bible classes, 2 Samuel chapter 1, and as we've just gotten done in 1 Samuel, talking about how the relationship between Jonathan and David had developed over the years, but right off the bat, they were such close friends. They loved each other so much. And then in that song in 2 Samuel chapter 1, you see David talking about how his love was better than the love of women. And as a guy, that makes me uncomfortable. Maybe it makes you uncomfortable. We talked a little bit about it in our class. There is no reason for us to be uncomfortable about that verse, about thinking about that. Because when you have a close friend, somebody who you connect with on a deep and meaningful level, that's a relationship that's special. That's a relationship that you are able to connect with somebody and you can hug it out, you can cry on each other's shoulders, and you know what you don't have to do after you get done doing that? You don't have to go, sports! Or whatever it is. Us guys, we like to get back to what we're comfortable in, if we do find ourselves getting a little bit soft from time to time. Love is what this lesson is about. Love in the context of friendship, because, and I was thinking maybe it would be too much to talk for 2 lessons today about this idea of friendship, about our 2x2 series, but I didn't really have any other ideas, so I figured we could talk about love. And by the way, if you could talk about anything, love is a valuable subject for us to discuss for a few minutes. As you think about friendship, and as we've already been doing in this series, we've looked at how friendship is valuable, how the scriptures talk all about how friendship is valuable. We've learned how there are a lot of obstacles in our friendship to developing these kinds of relationships, our time and our energy, and as we just got done talking about in our first lesson this morning, how different we are sometimes can really affect or impact how close we can get to people. But as we kind of transition away from what makes a friendship, how a friendship starts, I think what's most obvious as we think about developing a circle of friendship, when we think about really investing ourselves and giving ourselves to these relationships that we have, love is the first step. We have to have love in our relationships with each other, in our friendships with each other. Love is critical in the way that we bound ourselves to each other, in the ways that we unite. Love is the glue. And by the way, this is the big idea for this lesson. Love and compassion are the super glue that unite a friendship. Love and compassion get us past the the superficial, talking about sports and the superficial just kind of guy thing sometimes. And love is what gets us into something deeper. Love is what gets us into sacrifice. Love is what gets us into challenging each other and pushing each other, as we're going to talk about in a few lessons from now. Love is the ingredient, is the super glue that binds us together. And if we don't have love, of course, as we'll talk about this morning, the friendship is not going to last. Your relationship with someone is not going to last. And I want to be honest here this morning. This lesson is not going to blow anyone's minds. It's not. When Jesus answered the question here, as Jonathan read the verses, when Jesus was asked in Matthew 22 about what's the greatest commandment, and he answered that question in the way that we read there, you shall love the Lord your God with all of your heart and soul and strength, right from the Shema in Deuteronomy 6. He said the second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself, from Leviticus 19. That answer should not have blown their minds. They all knew that those were the two great commandments. All the Jewish people understood from the law that those were the pinnacles. And when Jesus said it, it was important for him to reiterate it because it is such a challenge for us to put into practice. Love is the super glue that binds us together. We've talked about how I hate sprinkler systems, right? I hate polyvinyl tubing. We don't have any more polyvinyl tubing in our backyard, by the way, now. Polyvinyl tubing has been excommunicated from our home. I hate that stuff. It breaks, it cracks, it's terrible. You know what we did? We put some Schedule 40 PVC in the backyard, and we got that thing on lock, except for the fact that the glue failed this past week, or a couple weeks ago, actually. Cheryl, a month ago? 2 months ago? She's been talking to me about it for a long time, and I just finally fixed it. So went out there, dug up the hole, and you know what was happening in that joint? It was just flexing like crazy, and it was a fountain in my backyard just all the time, and it was great and lovely and beautiful, and I had to fix it because my wonderful, lovely wife, whom I love, told me to do it 2 months ago, and I finally did it. But the super glue that binds us together, love, if that is failing, if we don't have love like we should, if we don't have that kind of commitment to each other out of love and compassion as we should, it's no wonder that these relationships will fall apart. And so I want to talk about that for a little bit this morning. Luke chapter 10, as we're here. Luke chapter 10 is a really powerful verse because this is a parallel account or a similar account talking about these two greatest commandments when in verse 25 a lawyer comes to Jesus, standing up and testing him, saying, "Teacher, what shall I do to inherit eternal life?" And Jesus says to him, "What is written in the law? How do you read it?" And in verse 27 he answers him, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and all your soul and with all your strength and with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself." And he said to him, "You have answered correctly. Do this, and you will live." Jesus answers the question. Yes, you're right, just like we read about in Matthew 22. And then he goes on to justify himself, and he says, "Hold on, Jesus. Who is my neighbor?" A la Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, he wants to know, who is my neighbor? Who is it, Jesus, who I'm supposed to treat in this loving way? And then Jesus goes on to tell him maybe one of the most famous stories of all time, story of the Good Samaritan. And how those two religious people passed by that man who was near death, beaten down on the side of the road, and they did nothing for him. And then it was the Samaritan. As Sean has very eloquently pointed out to us multiple times, how Luke loves to point to the outsider as the hero of the story. And who's the hero of this story? 100% it's a Samaritan who the Jews hated. And the Samaritan was the one, in verse 33, who had compassion. What does his compassion cause him to do? To go the extra mile, to take the extra step, to do everything he can to support this man who was beaten down. And at the end of this story, he said to the one, he asked him the question in verse 36, which of these three do you think proved to be a neighbor to the man who fell among the robbers? And in verse 37, the lawyer said, the one who showed him mercy. And Jesus said, you go and do likewise. Jesus doesn't answer his question about who he should be a friend to. He answers the question that he didn't even ask about how to do it. And the how to do it is to take action out of love and compassion. Compassion is a challenge. Do you ever find compassion to be challenging? Especially with a friend, especially in a close relationship? Because I'll tell you, nothing can ruin a friendship, nothing can sour a relationship between two people than somebody who's acting without compassion. What are we called to do? We're called to weep with those who weep, right? And rejoice with those who rejoice. We're called to connect with people. And that's really what we were talking about in our first lesson this morning, about becoming interested in the interests of others, putting other people first, humbling ourselves as we talk about in Philippians chapter 2, putting ourselves low, having the same mind that was in Jesus, that we're looking out for everyone's interest. We're looking out for other people more than ourselves. But it's easy to put myself at the top of the totem pole. It's easy to make myself the center of the story. Do you feel that way? Do you make yourself the center of the story? Do you make every person's problems around you your in the frame or in the view of your story? I want to ask you this question. When a friend comes to you and they start talking to you about the problems they're having, the difficulties they're facing, do you put their difficulties in the frame of your life? Do you start thinking about their problems the way that it might impact you if you had those problems? I say that because people go through stuff that I will never understand. Husbands with children, all you have to do is look at your wife to understand the point I'm trying to make. I don't care what we think, dudes. You have no idea what it's like to give birth to a child. You don't. I don't. But when a woman tells me what that's like, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to believe her. Because I have no reason not to. And for me, I need to see that everyone who's going through things around me, whether I understand it or not, whether it lines up with my own personal situation or not, what do I have to do if I'm a compassionate individual? I have to believe them and take action. I have to have compassion and empathy and connect with them, not trying to understand it or fix it necessarily. That, by the way, men, that's another problem we have. I am just harping on you guys today. The ladies are getting a pass. Guys, we love to try to fix every problem, right? And sometimes it's helpful if you're in a marriage, you've been married for a long time. Sometimes it's helpful for you to ask the question before the conversation even gets down the road too far. Is this a situation that you want me to fix, or do you just want me to sit here and open my ears? It's helpful. But to have compassion is to see that someone else may be going through something that you don't understand, that maybe you don't even know how to fix, but you're going to be there. And for a friend to just be there with you, I think about Jonathan. How many times did Jonathan step in for David? How many times did Jonathan plead David's case to Saul, right? But then there was a time after David had to flee that all Jonathan could do now is just show up and be there. He couldn't fix the situation. He couldn't do anything to bring David home. He couldn't change his father's mind. But all he could do was just show up and be there and be a friend. So I want us to understand that compassion is directly tied to action, but compassion does not always equate to action. Compassion does not always mean I am doing something, but I'm going to do whatever I can or whatever makes sense in the moment. It is still loving for us to see a friend and cry with them. Fix nothing about their situation, change nothing about what's going on in their life, but just to be there with them. Compassion is powerful, and it's action, but it's not going to look always like we're saving in and swooping in to become the hero of what's going on. In this story that Jesus tells, this Samaritan was an action man. He did some things for this beaten down Jew that none of the other ones would do. What can you do out of compassion? The point here that I'm trying to drive at is because love is the superglue, love is not easy, right? Love is not something, we fall into, right? A lot of people, especially as they're younger, they fall into love. Like, well, that's not a thing. Love is deep. Love is meaningful. It's something that causes us to take action. And as we look at this passage here, Jesus loved his neighbor. Jesus followed the two greatest commandments. And Jesus calls us to do the same. Is it any wonder why Jonathan and David, going back to that story, is it any wonder why Jonathan and David had such a close, intimate relationship with each other? Because they had the first great commandment in mind. They loved the Lord their God with all of their heart and soul and mind and strength. And of course, that united them together. I talked in our first lesson about how we're so different from each other. And what I really wasn't talking so much about was how much we have in common. We have our love for God in common. And if that's all we ever have, we've got everything in common. And I think for all of us, we need to see that love is the thing that binds us together, our love for God first. This applies in a friendship, but it absolutely applies in marriage as well. Why do you think that we should take great heed to the warning not to be unequally yoked with unbelievers? Because when your love for God is not matched by their love for God, there's an imbalance. We cannot find equilibrium in the power of God's love. And so I want to go back. We're gonna consider two other passages, but for the rest of our lesson, I want to go back to the beginning of this second greatest commandment passage, and that is in Leviticus 19. So please turn back with me. Leviticus 19. When I'm talking about the fact that love is hard, I'm talking about the fact that we all know. You know love is hard. Have you ever gotten into a difficult spot with a friend? Have you ever had tension with a friend? Have you? Nelma has. I have. We all have, I think. Because these relationships, these close bonds we have, they need to be cared for. They need to be tended to. And they need to make sure that we are continuing to be loving. It's not just a, well, I loved you once kind of friendship. That's not how it works. So let's go back here to Leviticus 19. And all the way back, what all of these Jews were always talking about, and what Jesus quoted in Matthew 22, was this idea in these 5 paragraphs. And I love this little section in Leviticus 19, verse 9, beginning, because there's 5 paragraphs, and each of these paragraphs share a separate point that we need to focus on when it comes to our love for our neighbor. And as specifically we're going to be talking about here in this lesson, our love for our friends. Look at verse 9. When you reap the harvest of your land, you shall not reap your field right up to its edge, neither shall you gather the gleanings after your harvest. You shall not strip your vineyard bare, neither shall you gather the fallen grapes of your vineyard. You shall leave them for the poor and for the sojourner. I am the Lord your God. The structure of these paragraphs is wonderful. I love the way that this is written. But what is this first point here is that we need to provide for our neighbor. We need to provide for our neighbor. Back then, they were called not to strip all of their harvest bare, but to leave some so that any of their neighbors could come along and they could eat. Are you thinking of a character here who did this? Absolutely. Think about here how God is taking care of his people by telling his people specifically, leave some left over for others. Is providing for other people easy? Is that a simple thing? Oh, it's just, I'm so... you get to some people and they're like, oh, he's such a provider, right? Yeah, you could say he's a provider, but what is he doing all day long? He's working all the time. So he can provide, right? That's the whole point. Providing takes work. And what often happens in our work is we want to take all of the proceeds for ourselves, and we want a white-knuckle grip on it, and we want to hoard it for ourselves. But love opens our hand and gives it away. And if you have a friend who has provided for you, you have a great friend. If you have somebody close to you in your inner circle who has just written the check, or who has opened the door, or who has set the table for you, you have a great friend. Because love is about providing, and providing takes work. And so we go on here in verse 11. You shall not steal. You shall not deal falsely. You shall not lie to one another. You shall not swear by my name falsely, and so profane the name of your God. I am the Lord. The second point that love does in these friendly relationships that we have, love is honest. Love tells the truth. That is where we get into those proverbs where iron sharpens iron, right? Because when love tells the truth, you always like to hear the truth. If I just, had everybody stand up here today, this morning, got everybody up here, and I said, okay, now tell me something about that person that's true. I mean, we all might try to be nice about it, right? But there's a lot of true stuff about us, honest things about us that aren't always easy to hear. But we need to be able to sharpen each other in a way that's honest and true, and know that my friend, because they love me, they're going to tell me the truth. They're not going to hide it from me. They're not going to lie to me. They're going to be honest with me. Is honesty easy? No, it's not. No, it's not. Because the default reaction of hiding things and keeping things quiet and maybe gossiping about it to somebody else, or like whatever it is, that's the easy reaction, not standing face to face with somebody and being honest. Love is honest. And then we get into verse 13, where it goes on to say, you shall not oppress your neighbor or rob him. The wages of the hired worker shall not remain with you all night until the morning. You shall not curse the deaf or put a stumbling block before the blind, but you shall fear your God. I am the Lord. We need to protect each other. We need to protect each other. Take care of each other. Don't put a stumbling block before somebody who can't see it. Don't call people names when they can't hear you. We need to protect each other's purity, protect each other's holiness. We need to protect each other's physical safety. When we love each other, we protect each other. And where is the second greatest commandment in all of this? We're getting to it, right? But when Jesus calls out the second greatest commandment, this is all a part of it. We go on to verse 15. You shall do no injustice in court. You shall not be partial to the poor or defer to the great, but in righteousness you shall judge your neighbor. You shall not go around as a slanderer among your people, and you shall not stand up against the life of your neighbor. I am the Lord. Do what's fair. Do what's fair for your friend. Do what's fair for those who you love. Don't be so partial to the one who is rich and has all kinds of money, but treat the poor person lower and lesser. Does that sound like another story we know from Jesus? Sound like another story we know in other places as well? Sound like a story you know in your own life? Oh, that person over there. I'm going to ignore them. Maybe you don't say that. But love for our friends doesn't care about their financial status or who they are or what community they came from or their background or the color of their skin. Love for our neighbor treats people fairly. I am the Lord, he says. And then we get to it in verse 17. You shall not hate your brother in your heart, but you shall reason frankly with your neighbor, lest you incur sin because of him. You shall not take vengeance or bear a grudge against the sons of your own people, but you shall love your neighbor as yourself. I am the Lord. You got to work it out. And that's where we get into a friendship, right? And all of us have been there, where our friends, we go through times. We have difficult moments. We go through tension. But you know what you do? You work it out. Why do you do that? Why do you work these things out and these troubles and difficulties? Because you love your neighbor as yourself. And we do all of these things. We put all of these qualities into our life because God told us to do it. Every single one of these is punctuated by the statement, I am the Lord. You think about your friends. You think about the friend that you have that is closer than a brother. And I want you to think about how they follow these qualities. Think about a friend who provides for you, who takes care of you. Think about a friend who is honest with you and tells you the truth. Think about a friend who's going to go through whatever they need to protect you and watch out for you. Think about a friend who doesn't care where you came from, your background, what's going on in your baggage that you're carrying around from your history. They want to treat you fairly. And think about a friend who, you know what, no matter what you say, no matter what you've done, no matter how many times you've stuck your big, giant, size 12 shoes in your mouth, they love you anyway. Think about a friend who loves the Lord and who loves you. Love is the basis for our friendship. But can't you see out of all of this that love takes work? That friendship takes work? So really, we've talked about how a lot of friendship is difficult, right? We got to see the value in it. We got to make the time for it. We got to get over the differences that we have with each other. And then we have to adopt this quality like love, which requires so much of us. Yeah. That's what God made us for. You see that, right? When Jesus said in Matthew 22, when he approved of the lawyer's saying here in Luke 10, when they said the two greatest commandments focus on love, what else is life about than to have this intimate, close relationship with God through his Son Jesus, to commit every moment of ourselves to him, and then to turn around and commit ourselves to each other? What else is life about, really? We need to get good at being a friend. We need to get good at loving. And of course, no sermon about love would be complete without going to 1 Corinthians 13. So let's do it just so we can feel like we've checked off the box, because I think it is important for us to understand what Paul is saying here in 1 Corinthians 13, because clearly they had a lot of other desires that they wanted this church. This church wanted all kinds of fame. They wanted all kinds of power and these miracles and these blessings, these gifts of the Holy Spirit. But Paul is trying to get them to see that no matter what you could ever have, one gift is always greater. One gift, one way is more excellent. And then he goes on in chapter 13, verse 1, to really explain to us how you could do all kinds of things in your life. You could accomplish so much, but if you don't have love, you've just wasted it all. And then to highlight just how difficult love really is, verse 4 says, love is patient and kind. If he stopped right there and just said love is patient and kind, could we all just make a list today of all the ways that that's going to challenge us? I'm so patient, by the way. No, I'm not. All of us are going to struggle even with the very first quality here of love. Love is patient. Well, I'm out. All of us are going to have a tough time implementing these things. Love is patient and kind. Love does not envy or boast, is not arrogant or rude. It does not insist on its own way. It is not irritable or resentful. It does not rejoice at wrongdoing, but rejoices in the truth. Love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Love never ends. I read that quickly, but you should not, and I should not. If you're going to meditate on anything this week, I hope you'll meditate on this verse. I hope you'll meditate on a quality here that maybe you struggle with, to find out how you can love better. What do you need to do to be a better friend to somebody in the way that you show them love? Love is selfless. Love gives. Love is something that we all are going to have to implement in our life if we want to have these relationships with each other, but obviously if we want to have a relationship with God. So let me just ask you this question. I know I'm going to get into the wrap-up here. Have you ever done something to a friend and they've seen your worst side, but they still loved you anyway? That ever happened to you? I think all of us have. I hope all of us have a friend who has seen us at our lowest, but still love us anyway. Because that's what love is. Love is work. Love is effort. Love is commitment. Love is not just going to throw in the towel at the first sign of trouble. Love sticks it out. And friends stick it out. Because friends love each other. And so, can we just have a challenge here, maybe this week? Maybe this is helpful for you, maybe not. But if you have a friend who you'd like to develop a stronger bond with, ask them this question. How can I be a better friend to you? How can I be a better friend to you? That expresses something when you ask a question like that. It expresses that you value this relationship. It expresses that you appreciate their happiness and their well-being. You are looking out for them and you want to be there for them. How can I be a better friend to you? Maybe that's helpful for you. Maybe that's something you can do to your friend, talking to them this week. And as we think about our lives, we can always be better in our love. Again, this is basic, right? Super simple. We talk about love a lot, but I think we should. And as we talk about friendship, as we talk about loving each other and building these bonds, love is the super glue that holds these things together. And so as we stop and we conclude the lesson, just remember back to Luke 15, John 15. not Luke 15, John 15. Talking about the vine and how we're connected to Jesus. And how what Jesus wants for us to understand more than anything is that he is our friend. He is our friend who has laid down his life for us. He is our friend who has given everything so that we could live. Why did he do that? Why did he die for us? Because God so loved the world that he gave his only son. And if you're willing to reciprocate that love to him this morning, if you're willing to commit your life to him in baptism, we'd love to get you started on that journey. Please come as we stand and sing.